Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I've been a lawyer now for 31 years, and it's not often I see a story where I go, wow, I've never heard of that before. Matt sent me a note and said, Steve, check this out. You ever heard of this before? And I have not. And so from the New York Times, some prisoners remain behind bars in Louisiana despite being deemed free. So they say to you, you've been found guilty of something, you're being sentenced, you got to go to jail or prison for a certain length of time. You assume that when the time is up, you get to leave. Louisiana, you'll get to leave eventually, but not right away. And this is crazy. Glenn Thrush writes this. The judge told a man named Johnny Trawick he had served his time, 7 months, for hitting someone with a saucepan in a drunken fight, then suggested he could be released from the Orleans Parish prison by midnight. So the man was told, midnight on this particular day, you get out. So he started giving away his stuff because, and this, by the way, is a common thing. I've spoken to people who spent time in jail. And in jail or prison, the simplest little things can become luxuries. So if you've got an extra blanket, for instance, someone might say, hey, now that you're leaving, and on the outside, you can get blankets all day long. Can I have your blanket? So he gave away some of his stuff, including a blanket, a couple sweatshirts, some food, and then he waited out the final hours of May 2nd, 2018, which was his last legal day to be required behind bars. So they said on May 2nd, 2018, when the clock strikes midnight, you can leave. Midnight came and went. Around 4 a.m., he was laying in bed, eyes open, when the staff summoned inmates for breakfast. He began repeating that routine 19 more days because the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections hadn't processed his paperwork in a timely manner. It's a bad feeling, he says. He's now 70 years old. Every day I'm getting up and thinking I'm going to get out, and it doesn't happen. I knew I wasn't in there for any charge, and I still have to sit there. Now, here's the thing. He spent 19 extra days in jail. And you might say, Steve, if you'd been in there for a long time and 19 days, I mean, that's not the end of the world. Although most of us, if we were grabbed at random and held for 19 days and we didn't deserve to be where we were being held, we'd flip out. But here's the thing. It turns out that a lot of times this happens in Louisiana, and many times it's more than 19 days. In fact, the average is 44 days. The average is 44 days. So his case was neither atypical nor the worst. Roughly 200 inmates are held beyond their legal release date on any given month in Louisiana. That amounts to 2,000 to 2,500 of the prisoners each year. And by the way, the state processes like 12 to 16,000, so it's a fraction of that. But the average length of additional time was around 44 days in 2019. That's according to the state's own data. And some people were held as long as 90 days. And in fact, if you call the public hotline to find out when your loved one's going to be released, it says right on there, they tell you, it might be 90 days. So if you think your loved one's getting out of jail on January 1st, it might be more like March, April, right around there. In most other states and cities, prisoners and parolees marked for immediate release are typically processed within hours, not days. Although those times can vary, particularly if officials must make arrangements required to release registered offenders. But in Louisiana, the problem known as over-detention. See, you create a cool word for it. It doesn't sound so bad. Oh, I was over-detained. Oh, sounds like fun. It's a problem. It often occurs without explanation or apology or compensation. And it's an overlooked crisis in Louisiana where quite a few people there do get put in jail or prison. Practice is also wasteful. And again, a lot of times I'll come on here and I talk about something and someone goes, Steve, I don't see the problem. I don't see the problem. If you get sentenced to 90 days in jail and they hold you for 110, you shouldn't have gotten the 90 days in jail. Well, you understand that you've been told you're going to be in prison for this amount of time, you get out. But the portion they hold you for beyond that, the state is wasting tax dollars on that. And what's weird is I've said this before and people actually get mad at me for saying that. They go, Steve, you've got no right to complain about tax dollars being wasted. Actually, I do. I pay tax dollars. I file tax returns. I actually pay taxes. And so when I cut the checks to pay my taxes, I actually think to myself, I wonder how much of this will be wasted on stupid things. Now, I'm not in Louisiana. I can't complain about Louisiana's with the exact same authority, but people in Louisiana should say this is stupid because it costs them money. It turns out that the Department of Corrections in Louisiana has calculated how much it costs them to over-detain people. Guess what? $2.8 million a year. 2.8. Now you're going to say, Steve, in the grand scheme of a state and their budget, 2.8 million is not much. Well, but that's the thing. One of the reasons budgets are bloated is because nobody's watching how the money's being wasted. Our tax dollars hard at waste. $2.8 million. What could they do with that money if it's being spent properly? They could probably do some good. The state has not made liberty or taxpayer money a priority in how they run their prisons, says the lawyer based in New Orleans who has filed 2 class action lawsuits on behalf of over-detained inmates. To our clients, it is an extremely scary experience because they do not know why they're being held, when they'll be free, or how they can get free. All they know is that they should not be behind bars. In December of 2020, the Justice Department opened an investigation into the practices the state used to determine the release of its prisoners, particularly those like Mr. Trawick, who remained behind bars despite being eligible for immediate release. The investigation, according to people with knowledge of the situation, is expected to find widespread violations of a federal law that guarantees imprisoned people their rights, privileges, or immunities. And so the story goes on and on beyond that, and about how often this happens. And it's crazy because, we've talked about life, liberty, and property. A lot of people say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those three words are actually different depending on where you find them. What I'm getting at is the Declaration of Independence talks about how we needed to break free from the other country and become our own. And it says in there that the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are 3 things that we hold dear. And then when we drafted the Constitution and adopted it in later years, it was life, liberty, and property, which were the 3 things, the triumvirate, the 3 things that we hold so dear. And of course, life, liberty, and property are the things that you cannot be deprived of without due process of law. So life, liberty, of course, is the one here, and you've been locked up, and they have a right to lock you up if you've been sentenced properly and gone through the trial and all that with due process, right? So the initial portion of your lockup is constitutional. And that's been upheld for, going back to day one, that you commit a crime and the punishment is being locked up, you're locked up. But at the end of the time, you're supposed to be let out. And so I'm not going to say that the split second, at midnight, and a second at hand goes past at 1 second, that suddenly you're entitled to billions of dollars in compensation. Not saying that at all. But the system's got so much slop built into it that you're held for 20 days, 30 days, 90 days, where it's so bad that the recorded voice on the phone actually says, if you're inquiring about the release date of a loved one, it might not be for 90 days past their release date before they get out. And you have to ask yourself, is this being done intentionally? Or are they really this bad at running their prisons? Because I've not heard of this happening in other states. And that's always one of the first things you look at. We've got 50 states in America, although some people want to quibble about the commonwealths. But whatever you call them, there's 50 entities who each get a star on our flag. How's that? And one state's got this massive problem. Why is that? Is it mismanagement? Or are they doing this on purpose? And in either case, it's not the fault of the people who are locked up. Because, like I said, you get locked up for a term, you're supposed to get out. I remember one of the first occasions of something that was widely publicized on this topic was the O.J. Simpson trial. And I remember I was actually watching TV. Somebody brought a TV to the office in anticipation of a verdict coming down that day. And turned the TV on, and we're all watching the TV. And the jury comes back and finds O.J. not guilty on the 2 charges he was facing. And a bunch of backslapping and celebrating and so on. And then O.J. got up and went back out the side door of the courthouse the way he did at the end of every single other day of trial. And I remember the commentators actually saying, and oh, by the way, even though he has been found not guilty and he's free to leave, they've still got to process him. And so there is some paperwork they had to do back at the jail and whatever else. And he was out later on, I believe that same day. So it was a matter of hours, but they still had to do something. And so people don't quibble about the something. But I have seen a case where somebody gets brought into court and the jury comes back and goes, not guilty. And I've seen it before. The judge goes, you're free to leave. I've seen that happen also. So it can happen either way, but the idea that you're going to be held in jail for 90 days as a matter of routine beyond what your actual sentence is crazy. It's crazy. So there is a lawsuit that's been brought. It looks like 2 lawsuits have been brought against the state of Louisiana and the Department of Corrections for over-detention of people. And while I hope those people get something for their troubles and I hope they stop the practice, I'm morbidly fascinated to figure out, how did it get this way? How does that happen? Because isn't there somebody in charge of that system? I'm talking about the department who oversees this. Isn't there somebody in charge? And are they understaffed? Are they underpaid? Or is somebody in charge incompetent? But that's a problem. And I will speculate, there's a good chance the problem hasn't been addressed yet because people thought, well, they're prisoners and they've done something wrong. So if they get sentenced to 90 days in jail and we hold them for another 45, who cares? Who cares? Well, the court says 90 days, 90 days is 90 days. And so if I was a judge down there and I found out that I sentenced someone to 90 days and they got 180, I'd want to have somebody come in and explain why that was happening. I'd do a show cause on my own motion. I'd actually bring a motion and say, I want somebody in here from the Department of Corrections to explain this to me right now and explain it in a way that'll make sense to me and to everybody in the courtroom and to everybody in jail who shouldn't be there because they've been over-detained, which is a crazy concept. So Matt, thanks for sending me the story from the New York Times. Glenn Thrush wrote it. It's actually quite lengthy. I just hit the key points there. Some prisoners remain behind bars in Louisiana despite being deemed free by the system. They've just been over-detained. Questions or comments, put them below. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Do memory foam mattresses wish they could forget?